There are crimes so vile, so cursed, that even the gods recoil in silence. Long before the boy with the swollen feet was abandoned on a mountainside, before he pierced his father's heart with a blade, before he ever called his own mother wife, the curse had already been written in blood. It began with a king and a crime. Laius, ruler of Thebes, was not born a monster. But power has a way of turning men into something worse. During his exile in the court of King Pelops, Laius became obsessed with a boy, not just any boy, but Chrysippus, the golden-haired prince. A child. And Laius, like a shadow in the shape of a man, stole him, kidnapped him, ravaged him. And for that, the gods did not send thunder. They sent something far worse, a prophecy. You will have a son, and he will destroy you. He will spill your blood, lie with your queen, and from your house will rise only ash. Laius heard it and ignored it, because what tyrant ever thinks the future applies to him? Years passed. Thebes grew fat with feasts, and Laius married Jocasta, a woman as proud as she was beautiful. But something lingered behind their royal smiles. A secret. A whisper that returned when Jocasta became pregnant. The prophecy. Desperate to outwit fate, Laius did what cowards in power often do. He turned against the innocent. When the baby was born, dark-eyed, perfect, Laius ordered his ankles pierced with iron stakes, then tied the infant by his mangled feet, and sent a servant to leave the child on Mount Cithaeron to die. No name, no cradle, just blood, wind, and silence. But destiny does not die in the cold. A shepherd from Corinth found the child, barely breathing, sobbing in pain with iron still hanging from his bones. He took pity, took the boy, and carried him to his king, who had no heir and too much wealth. They named him Oedipus, swollen foot. They never asked where he came from, and he never knew what had been done to him. Far away, Laius slept soundly in Thebes, believing he had defeated the will of Olympus. But every night, the gods whispered in the winds. He lives. He grows. He remembers nothing, but the blood calls. He was 20 and full of questions. Oedipus had grown tall, sharp-witted, beloved by the people of Corinth. But behind his eyes, in every mirror, every dream, something was missing. Something broken. He was not like the others. His name meant swollen foot, but no one would say why. His parents, the king and queen who raised him, averted their gaze when he asked about his childhood. There were no lullabies, no stories, no cradle memories, only silence. One day, in a drunken haze, a noble mocked him at a banquet. Bastard. Foundling. Not blood of the throne. The word stung like venom. And so Oedipus went to Delphi, to the oracle of Apollo, to demand the truth of his birth. But the gods answered with something far darker. You will kill your father. You will marry your mother, and your children will be your curse. He staggered away, trembling. Not once did it occur to him that the king and queen of Corinth were not his true parents. To escape the prophecy, Oedipus did what every doomed man does. He ran. He fled Corinth, thinking distance could erase destiny. But on a narrow, jagged road, where three paths met under a dying tree, he found his fate waiting. A royal chariot thundered toward him, refusing to yield. Inside sat a man cloaked in arrogance and jewels, King Laius of Thebes, returning from a distant oracle, haunted by the same prophecy. The chariot struck Oedipus's foot, the same foot once pierced by iron. Blood soaked through his sandal. Laius, proud and cruel, shouted, "Move, peasant." Oedipus replied not with words, but with fury. He drew his blade. It was not a duel. It was an execution. Oedipus struck Laius down, slicing through flesh and prophecy. Laius's body tumbled into the dust like a broken god. The guards rushed forward. Oedipus killed them all, save one who fled into the hills, too horrified to speak. The path forked once more, and Oedipus, blood on his hands, soul scorched with guilt, walked toward Thebes, unaware he had just murdered his own father. Behind him, the wind whispered through the trees. One fate fulfilled, one horror closer. The city of Thebes was choking, not on war, not on fire, but on riddles. A monstrous creature, part lion, part woman, with wings darker than midnight, perched at the gates. The Sphinx. Born of the gods, fed by blood, she asked a single question to every traveler. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? Those who failed to answer died screaming. The road was littered with bones. Thebes had become a mausoleum of silence and fear. No man dared challenge her. Not kings, not warriors, not priests. And then came a stranger, limping. Oedipus stood before the Sphinx not with sword, but with thought. His eyes burned with something she recognized, pain. He listened to her riddle and answered. Man, as a child, he crawls. As an adult, he walks. And in old age, he uses a cane. For the first time in years, The Sphinx did not laugh. She screamed, loud and terrible, then leapt from the cliff and shattered on the rocks below. Thebes roared with joy. Their savior had come, and not on a throne, but in rags. The widowed queen, Jocasta, stood upon the palace steps, her eyes heavy with loss and curiosity. The prophecy had said her son would return in ruin, but this man was no boy. He was a king of his own making. Thebes offered him the crown. Jocasta offered her hand. Oedipus, proud, limping, blind to fate, accepted both. The wedding bells rang, and no god dared speak. That night, beneath silk sheets and torchlight, the mother welcomed her son into her bed, and the world, for a moment, held its breath. They ruled together for years. Their union brought peace. For children were born 2 sons, 2 daughters, each with eyes too wide, as if they'd seen something no child should. Neither Jocasta nor Oedipus ever questioned it. Why the gods were silent. Why the past felt so distant. Why sometimes, in the dark, Jocasta's hands trembled when she touched his face. But the truth, like a viper, slithered beneath the throne. And soon it would strike. They ruled Thebes in peace, until the dead began to speak. First came the plague, choking crops, stealing infants from their mothers' arms, rotting men from the inside. The people cried, bled, begged for help. And Oedipus, the king they adored, swore to find the cause. He sent for the blind prophet, Tiresias, the one who saw more than any man with eyes. But Tiresias arrived in silence. He stood before the throne, white eyes glazed like milk, and said nothing. Oedipus, impatient, angry, roared, "Speak, old man. What curse haunts my city? Who brings death to my people?" Tiresias' voice cracked like thunder. You are the rotting root. You are the man who murdered his father and lies each night with his mother." The throne room froze. Jocasta dropped her goblet. Servants turned pale. Oedipus laughed, not from joy, but panic. "Liar. Blasphemer. I am the son of Corinth's king. I ran from prophecy. I defied the gods." But Tiresias did not blink. "And in running, you ran straight into their hands." Something inside Oedipus cracked. He began digging, clawing through layers of memory, prophecy, history. He summoned messengers, shepherds, servants. One by one, the pieces began to fall. The man he killed on the road, a king traveling from Delphi, his ankles scarred, just like the child left to die on Mount Cithaeron. The shepherd who spared the infant, still alive, still haunted. Jocasta, who once abandoned a baby to avoid a prophecy, and now lay beside that very child each night. The palace began to spin. Jocasta knew before he said it aloud. She saw the horror growing behind his eyes, and she ran to her chambers, silent and shaking. When Oedipus arrived moments later, the door was locked. He broke it down with his bare hands, and there, hanging from the silk sash of her royal gown, was the body of his wife, his mother. He screamed until his voice shattered, then stumbled forward, dropped to his knees, and tore the brooches from Jocasta's dress. He drove them into his own eyes again and again, until darkness became permanent. "You will see no more, Oedipus," he whispered. "No more weddings. No more mothers. No more lies." Blood pooled on the marble. Outside, Thebes wept for a king who had seen too much. He walked alone, bloodied eyes, torn robe, no crown, no name, just Oedipus, the man who killed his father, married his mother, and birthed a curse. The palace guards did not stop him. The people did not cheer. Even the gods, for once, said nothing. He left Thebes in silence. Behind him, the city crumbled into whispers and shame. But he left something far worse than scandal. For children, born of a union never meant to be. Eteocles and Polynices, his sons, divided by ambition, both clawing for a throne soaked in blood. Antigone and Ismene, his daughters, caught between law and love, future and fate. They were beautiful, smart, strong, but they were also doomed, because blood remembers, and the sins of the father do not fade, they ferment. In exile, Oedipus wandered like a ghost, blind, but not broken. Each night, he heard Jocasta's voice in the wind. Each step felt like walking over the bones of his past. Some say he reached Colonus, a quiet village where the Furies slept beneath the soil. There, he begged the gods for rest. Not redemption, not forgiveness, just silence. And they gave it to him. One final breath, one final prayer, one final grave for a man who lived and died as a lesson. But back in Thebes, his children began to turn on each other. Eteocles seized the throne and exiled his brother. Polynices raised an army of 7 kings and marched against the city gates. The sons of Oedipus, 2 sides of the same curse, would soon face each other in a war written long before they were born. And somewhere deep in the royal tombs, the blood of Laius still cried out. They were brothers, born minutes apart, raised in the same palace, fed by the same mother, cursed by the same father. And yet, One would not let go of the throne. The other would not stop until it was burned to ash. Eteocles, firstborn, ruthless, refused to share his crown. Polonius, exiled, burning with fury, made a pact with 7 warlords. Together, they marched on Thebes not as liberators, but as executioners. This 7 against Thebes, 7 kings, 7 armies, one family tearing itself apart at the gates of destiny. The stars were black that night. Thebes prepared for war, but this wasn't just steel and siege. This was legacy bleeding from open wounds. And in the heart of it all, 2 brothers, 2 alike to live together, 2 proud to die apart. On the battlefield, Polonius raised his spear. "You stole my birthright," he cried, "and now I'll take it with blood." Eteocles didn't hesitate. "Come and try, brother." And then they charged, not as kings, but as cursed beasts born to finish what Oedipus began. No soldier touched them. No general gave orders. The battlefield stood still, watching the sons of incest rip each other open like wolves. Steel met bone. Blood met soil. And when the dust cleared, both lay dead, locked in a final embrace of death. Neither surrendered. The gods had claimed them both. But the war did not end with swords. Creon, their uncle, took the throne and made one final decree. Eteocles, hero of Thebes, would be buried with honor. Polonius, traitor and brother slayer, would be left to rot in the sun, his body unburied, devoured by dogs. To deny burial in ancient Greece was not just punishment. It was eternal damnation. And yet, one person refused to obey. Antigone, daughter of Oedipus, sister to the fallen kings. She would not let her brother's soul be erased, even if it meant her own death. The curse was not over. It had simply changed shape. No crown, no army, just a girl with dirt under her fingernails and fire in her blood. Antigone was not born to rule. She was born to remember. She watched her father, blind, broken, vanish into exile. She buried her mother, a queen hanging by a silk noose. She tended her brothers until they turned swords against each other and fell in matching graves. Now, Creon, her uncle, sat on the throne, a man drunk on law, but starved of mercy. He made one command: let Polonius rot. No mourning, no burial. Let the dogs have him. But Antigone knew better, not because she loved Polonius more, but because the dead deserved rest, because some laws are older than kings. So in the dead of night, she stole into the field, past guards who slept with wine on their breath. She crept through mud and blood, carrying nothing but a jar of sacred dust and her mother's scarf. At the body of her brother, mangled, bloated, torn, she knelt. Her hands trembled. Her breath burned. But she buried him anyway, not out of defiance, out of duty. When dawn came, the guards found disturbed earth, a light sprinkling of burial dust, a gesture, but one powerful enough to shake a kingdom. Creon demanded answers, and Antigone stepped forward, unafraid. "Yes," she said, "I did it. I broke your law, but I obeyed the gods." The court gasped, but Creon, prideful and paranoid, saw only rebellion. He ordered her entombed alive, walled into a cave, with no food, no light, no prayers. "Let her marry death," he spat, "since she loves it so." Inside that stone prison, Antigone sat in silence. No tears, no screams, just the weight of centuries on her shoulders. And then, with her mother's scarf, she tied her final knot. When Creon finally relented, warned by prophets, shaken by omens, they opened the cave and found her hanging in the dark. Next to her, her betrothed, Haman, Creon's own son, lay with a sword through his chest. He had found her too late and joined her in death. Moments later, Creon's wife, overcome by grief, took her own life. 3 bodies, 1 law, and a king left alone on a throne soaked in ash. Once, there was a house of kings. Their halls gleamed with gold. Their voices echoed through marble. They bathed in power, feasted on prophecy, and thought themselves gods. Now, nothing remains but dust and names carved into tombstones. Laius, Jocasta, Oedipus, Antigone, for generations. For tragedies, each thinking they could outwit fate, and each swallowed by it. Thebes still stands, but quieter now. Children walk past broken statues. Mothers murmur bedtime tales of the cursed king who married his mother and tore out his eyes, of the daughter who died for her brother, of the queen who hung herself in silk and shame. But no one speaks their names aloud, because names have power, and curses remember. The gods, they said nothing. From beginning to end, Olympus watched, unmoved. Because in their world, mortals are stories, and stories must be complete. But what remains then? Not vengeance, not justice, not even memory, just a warning buried deep in the bones of Thebes. Blood begets blood, pride invites ruin, and no one escapes the story they were born into. The house of Laius is gone, but in every crown, in every child born under prophecy, in every whispered law that defies mercy. Its shadow still lingers. So when you hear a voice in the dark calling your name, when fate knocks in riddles, when blood leads you down a path lined in silence, turn back or become the next story the gods refuse to save.